So I don't know how useful it is, but what I do when I do ACT prep is, first of all, I find it really interesting. The students are so interested in study skills, and so I do give them some study tips. First of all, this whole theory of like wanting to exercise their brain, I use that a lot to kind of guide why we're doing the stuff we do. But I also promote the library for ACT specifically because you can check out a lot of all the most current and past ACT booklets by all the big name companies, and those are really expensive usually to buy every year. But I start checking them out and try to revise my materials each year now, just reading through them. Plus, there's just tons of practices in them. And if you think, I forget where the research comes from, but I mean, if your goal is just to do well on a test, then you should just take that test and practice that test and its structure. Really know its structure as much as possible. And so that's what I tell them. If they really are going for that ACT, and that's the test they're going to go for, it's probably a good goal since it could equal money. But then I tell them, always be taking notes as a good strategy overall, especially examples, rules, and questions they have so they can get clarification afterwards. So, notes are useless unless you follow up on your notes. But they also share with them the idea of high impact running, how that improves the brain and increases your learning by 20% significantly if you're doing high impact running. And they think that research is interesting. So we talk about how do we structure our day to optimize our brain and our learning speed. And another part of that is getting good sleep, but I also share with them the research on taking proper naps and why that's important. If you're going to take a nap to get a boost of energy, you will retain more if you study after taking a nap. But then there's also the research by Herman Ebbinghaus, where he talks about distributed practice, and so I'm very much against this idea of cramming before the test, and you should just spend 10 to 20 minutes doing a little ACT prep every night, preferably before bed. That's what his research says. It's not about ACT prep, it's just about learning any skill. But I apply it to ACT prep, so I say every night before they go to bed, they should spend 10 to 20 minutes looking at the ACT question of the day, and they can go to ACT.org and sign up for that, and it's free. Or just invest in some of those ACT flashcards if they really, really want to do a good job on the test. And so one thing specifically I do so they understand the anatomy of the text and really understand the questions, because I want them to tear apart the questions, is we go over what they can expect over the English and reading. And we look at the types of questions, which there are 6 basic types of questions, and the skills associated that you need integratedly to work together in order to get those 6 types of questions. So after taking a practice test, I would then have them take that take the questions and read over them in pairs or in small groups of 3, and then they have to come to consensus over which question type are each of the questions. So that might sound confusing. So they would look at questions 1 through 20 on a practice ACT test that I might give them. And so then they have to categorize those 20 questions between these 6 categories here: sentence structure, grammar, punctuation, organization, writing revision, just so they can really get a sense of feel like, okay, here are the questions represented in this practice. And then after looking at the answers, then they can determine where am I missing the most, so they can really pinpoint, oh, I missed the most grammar usage questions, or I missed the most writing revision questions. I should probably really practice and look up on more on how to study for that particular skill. That is just something I do. Same thing with the reading test. If I can scroll down. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so the reading test, same thing, go over the structure. And the question types are not as broad as in the English portion, because there's really just 2 types of questions: detail and deduction. So that's a shorter conversation, but I find is they need strategies to increase their reading speed. So stamina, reading stamina, but also what are they doing strategically to pinpoint details in the text. And so we talk about the 4 types in the passage, but also this idea of that if you're gaming the ACT, you just are going for maximum points. And so I would say, I think it was one of the recommendations, I forget which book, but I think it's a good recommendation. When you get to the reading part, because you only have 35 minutes to complete that reading, you want to start with the genre that you are most interested in or most skilled at reading. So for me, it would probably be prose. So I would start with prose, and I would do that really well, and that'd be easy points. I would leave something like natural science or humanities. Yeah, humanities is usually like history. I might do that last, just because yeah, that's not the most interesting to me, so that might take me the longest to do, and I might get the least amount of points for that, so I want to go for those easy points. So I'm going to start with my strength. Then I give them strategies for reading through the text, like what are they circling, underlining, and starring in the text, and also to eliminate this misconception that like if you're trying to focus on reading, you take a note card and you hold it underneath the text and drag down. You actually want to flip it around. It's something that learned through a speed reading class. It's better to just put it on top and then drag it down, so it forces you're forcing yourself to read faster, and that's kind of an idea about the reading for pleasure versus reading for test sake, is that you are not reading for pleasure, you are reading to get a good skim of the information. And as you go along, what is it that you want to keep an eye out for? And underline, circle, underline, and star. There's usually questions about shifts, so put a star next to where you see the author or writer shift their perspective or their attitude if it's a prose piece especially. And then you keep track of characters' names and their motives. That'll really drive the storyline, and that's really necessary, especially for such a short read. Same thing with nonfiction. You're going to circle, underline, and star, but you want to find out what's the purpose of this. Are they argumenting? Are they argumenting? Are they supporting an argument? Are they giving an opinion? Are they providing a counter-argument or giving background and history? Those are different types of purposes to keep an eye out for in the nonfiction passages. And then, of course, any topic sentences, that's usually going to be the claim that you might have to refer back to. But there's shifts in nonfiction, too. Then how to read, essentially. Give them 3 strategies. I like to give them 3 strategies to practice with. There's the very basic style. You read the passage, so you have all the context, and you answer the questions. And as you read, you do the circle, underline, and star. And then you answer the questions and refer back to your annotations to double-check yourself. And then, of course, the fortune teller strategy. Kids think this is useful. I don't know how useful it is, where they read the questions first, and so then they go into the text like a sniper, thinking they know exactly what to look for because they read the questions first, and then jump back and forth answering the questions that way. I actually like this strategy a lot, where they skimmy dip into the reading by reading the first paragraph, the entire first paragraph, then the first sentence of every paragraph after, and then reading the entire last paragraph, and then answer the question. So you get a good sense of the text, and then you are having to refer back to the passage. And I think it's really good for someone like me who would get bogged down into details and is a slow reader, because I'm reading for pleasure almost like automatically every time I pick something up. But if you just need to get a good sense of it and then get onto the questions and kind of jump back, that would be a good strategy. That is essentially it. Then I always like to leave off on the research shared by the top factors influencing admissions decisions. This is by the College Board, and yeah, admission test scores is high up there, but also your transcript is really important. Like, colleges want to see that you are challenging yourself and you're trying to take hard level courses. So an A in a regular English course might not get the same effect when they're looking at your transcript as a B or a C in like a really upper level, upper tier AP English course. And so I like to show them that too, that it's not just about the test scores, because they kind of freak out about that. But other than that, I do basic sentence structure too, go over that so they have the same language in there, because these are, like, they don't need to know the language, but they need to know how sentences work, how clauses work, the subjects, the predicate, and the conjunctions in there too. And so that is, in a nutshell, what I do that I hope is interesting and useful. I've had really good feedback so far.